I had the office inspector come, and when they arrived, I introduced myself as the head of school, and they literally looked me up and down in disgust and just thought, are you the head teacher? There was only 1% of black head teachers in the UK. There was definitely elements of racism, discrimination, and so forth. I think it's also reminding leaders about the importance of early intervention. You know, we are part of an ecosystem, all schools are, that will then ultimately become the next generation in the world that we live. Because of me stepping into the realm of motherhood, I had to do that differently. I believe that the environment that I'm creating in school is actually going to be much more beneficial for them, to give them the tools and the strategies to overcome those challenges. It's also about ensuring that our children have the right environments to thrive and also to achieve academically. Exclusions is another form of rejection. It's like another type of trauma. I'm a great believer, if we're not actively doing something to challenge or to push the tide in the opposite direction, then you're ultimately not helping. And if you're not helping, then you're just being part of the issue.
Welcome to Trust Matters Lessons in Leadership. In this episode, we're joined by Nadine Bernard, a head teacher, author, and social entrepreneur. Nadine became a head teacher at just 31 and was at the time believed to be the youngest black head teacher in the UK. Stepping into leadership so early and so visibly brought both opportunity and challenges. In this conversation, she reflects candidly on what that experience taught her about confidence, credibility, and power in the education system. We talk about the realities of leadership for black women in education, including the moments that made it clear that bias isn't incidental, it's structural. Nadine shares how she led an underperforming school into a thriving, nurturing community, the non-negotiables that underpin that turnaround, and how she balances compassion, behaviour, and academic outcomes in practice. We also explore the personal cost of leadership, from the impact of inspection and accountability on mental health to the pressure of carrying responsibility in high visible roles. Nadine speaks powerfully about sustainable leadership, motherhood, and why leadership development in this country still fails too many talented people. The conversation also traces the birth of Aspiring Heads, the multi-award-winning social enterprise Nadine founded in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and how it's helping to change the face of school leadership. This is a deeply honest, challenging, and hopeful conversation about leadership, representation, and what it really takes to create systems where talent is seen, supported, and able to thrive. Well, firstly, welcome to the podcast, Nadine. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Lovely to be here.
If you don't mind, if we can go a little bit back to the start of your journey before you became a head teacher, why is it that you wanted to get into teaching, and what was your journey from teacher to head teacher like?
Okay, so when I was 12, I actually made a decision that I wanted to be a teacher. And then it was when I was 18, I actually went to a conference, and there was a speaker there speaking about your potential and how it's good to fulfill it. And I then challenged myself at that point and said, you know what? I'm not just going to be a teacher. I'm going to be a head teacher. And from then, I literally was able to accelerate my career, secured my first headship at 31, being known at the time as the youngest, or potentially the youngest black head teacher in the UK. And I suppose in terms of why I'm so passionate about teaching is because my education journey wasn't so great, and I wanted to be able to be that difference for children who felt like me.
Yeah, I think a lot of people end up going teaching because of those reasons, don't
Yeah.
they? And you mentioned there that at the time you were 31 when you became a head teacher and you considered the youngest black head teacher in the UK then. What was that like, stepping into leadership so early, but also so visibly when you have a label like that attracts attention?
Yeah, I think for me, it was a moment of realization that there are different like stereotypes and social norms can be challenged, that although you may not see it, you can actually be it. And I think it's, for me, particularly, it was that moment in life where I realized that just because it is not a common thing, it can actually be made possible. And so I've always just taken that energy with me as I've kind of navigated my way through education, leadership, and so forth. I am a person who likes to push boundaries, someone who likes to do what someone says I can't do. And so that I suppose has really shaped how I make decisions and how I kind of move myself forward through leadership and the education landscape.
And if all of this wasn't challenging enough, being a young head teacher, a black head teacher, you were also joining a school that had previously been shut under Ofsted. You have turned the school around, you have a thriving community, great outcomes for the pupils and staff. What did you have to put in place when you first joined that school to make sure it went on the trajectory that you wanted it to go? And what were some of those non-negotiables you had?
Okay, yeah. So just to give it a bit of context, so I took over a school that basically the predecessor school was closed down. So the trust that took over had to rebrand, rename, and so forth. And then I was appointed to be head teacher of that school. The school had many challenges, and I was faced with behaviors that were quite shocking. But for me, one of my core beliefs and what I was really passionate about was that we're going to start building relationships. That's going to be our starting block. And one of the very first things that I did do was to review the behavior policy and to change it from behavior policy to relationships and behavior policy. So there was a really strong emphasis on that relational work. And I had to help others to see that and understand that without the basis of relationship, then you can't really change something authentically. It can be done very punitive if we want to for those very, very quick results. But I wanted long lasting results. And I really felt, okay, if we're able to work on ensuring that we can understand the community, that the children feel listened to and heard, because actually that's a massive transition for them. So I think sometimes we kind of just expect children to do or just to be without actually considering what's actually happening for them. And transition is very difficult. So if we can support that, and not only that for teachers, so coming in as a new leader, not all teachers would have been happy for that or maybe resistant to change, but ultimately it's helping them to understand, know that we're in this together. You know, I'm not coming to do things to you, but actually to do things with you to ultimately ensure that this community can be a place where everyone on every single level can thrive.
And I think the behaviour point there is quite
Mm,
interesting. It's something we hear a lot about in the sector is behaviour and is it getting worse? And what was the impact of the pandemic? And how
mm,
do we reverse some of the changes that we've seen? You've obviously done amazing work around behaviour in your school.
mm,
What are some of the practical bits of advice you'd have for leaders who may be listening now who are really struggling with that in their
mm.
setting?
I think for me, I would say, firstly, that it's so important to redefine success because success can often um, be looked upon in regards to outcomes as opposed to the whole child. And so I think it's a matter of us realizing that we have to ensure that we look at the whole picture and not just part of the picture. And so it also takes a bit of courage and bravery because everyone's looking for a quick fix. Everyone wants to be a school that is absolutely thriving and so forth. I could have potentially have turned around that school much quicker if I had decided to go down punitive measures, such as just excluding, whereas I decided that I wasn't going to exclude. So therefore, when you're helping children to understand themselves, when you're creating a nurturing environment, when you are developing and building character, it takes time. Nothing happens overnight. Even as adults, we know we need time. We need our experiences shape us. And it's about us taking time and leaders taking time to understand how the different experiences that our children are facing and are encountering, how that has impacted them, and taking time to be able to unpack that and then ultimately support them with achieving excellence in their academic processes. I think it's also reminding leaders about the importance of early intervention. We are part of an ecosystem, all schools are, that will then ultimately become the next generation in the world that we live. So I always say to my children, I always say my children in terms of my children at school, I want to make sure that the society that I'm creating is going to benefit me as an old woman.
Yeah, of course.
They may be the ones looking after me.
Yeah.
So I need to make sure and understand this is my investment for my future. And helping our children to be the best person of themselves, understanding their value and so forth, and the contribution that they will have and can have to the wider society as they move on, and helping them to understand their purpose in life. And so for leaders, recognizing that early intervention is key. It can help us to avoid a lot of the challenges that children, young people then end up facing if we just acted earlier. So I think it's kind of acting with that conviction and realizing that this is part of a bigger picture as opposed to just my school and doing what's the quickest, taking the quickest route to resolve. And ultimately, it's just putting plasters over something as opposed to really deep healing.
Yeah. And you mentioned exclusions, and we're seeing record numbers of the amount of pupils being excluded from mainstream education. What was it for you that it was so important that that wasn't the case in your school, even though you were facing seriously tough behaviour challenges? Why for you is not excluding children so important?
I believe exclusions is another form of rejection. And when people of any age experience rejection, then that ultimately is like another type of trauma. So understanding what leads to a child becoming excluded is often because of social, emotional, mental health needs. It's often because of special educational needs, and basically unmet needs. So if we just focus our energy on literally shipping the child out of the school, then how are we really helping to solve the problem and the issue? Many of these children that we're sending out of our schools are then going back into home environments where they have challenges and are going to encounter those same things that are ultimately the reasons why they are presenting in certain ways. And that's why I am so passionate about not excluding, because I believe that the environment that I'm creating in school is actually going to be much more beneficial for them, to give them the tools and the strategies to overcome those challenges. So at my school, we explicitly teach the children that it's okay to be angry. It's okay to not feel happy. It's okay to feel anxious. Okay, but firstly, how do we recognize when we're feeling that? And then what strategies can we use to tackle those emotions and help ourselves to get into a much more healthier place, ready for learning? And if we don't teach those skills explicitly, where else are they going to learn it? And so that's ultimately why I'm very passionate about not excluding. Also, we can see from statistics, the children who are excluded go on to be in those ones in justice systems, end up in prison. If people want to look at it from a financial point of view, it's actually a much more expensive route. When actually that money could be being poured back into our education system and creating more resources for those children, if we were able to stop that pathway being a way to do it. Also, one thing that really frustrates me is the idea that to exclude a child is actually the best way for them to gain the support that they need. For me, I question, why can we not give them that external support that is needed without having to do the exclusion? So again, that actually makes me really cross. And I've had that advice in the past, just exclude. And that's the way that the local authority or someone is going to respond to what we've been actually asking them for. But we're doing it at a detriment to the actual child. Now, I must be also very clear that I understand that the education system and how it's kind of shaped does not necessarily work for every single child. And that's why I actually think, if I get really radical, I think it needs a whole new reform. However, it is what it is. And so how do we create those alternative pathways for our children? And I think if we look at it in that lens, I think we'll be doing our children a much better service as opposed to trying to create one way and then creating the messaging that children are failing because they don't fit into that way of learning in the current education settings.
And what would your response be to people who might argue that you can't do both? You can't be nurturing a child, but also expect rigorous academic outcomes. What would your argument be that the two can work together? They don't have to be separate things.
If we look through a lens of compassion, it is the foundation of education. I don't think you can, some people think about, how can we balance nurture and academic outcomes? And actually, it's not about balancing, it's about creating the foundations and the environment to help children to thrive. So with that in mind, when we're thinking about compassionate leadership and thinking about how we secure outcomes, actually, let's look at data and look at it through a humanity lens. I could call it humanity data, looking at it and thinking, okay, not just where this child is academically and what's stopping them from progressing, but actually digging a bit deeper and thinking about, the why, the context of why, what is this child's current challenges and how can we help and support them? It's also about ensuring that our children have the right environments to thrive and also to achieve academically. To do that, we have to be compassionate. We have to be able to engage in relational work because that ultimately improves engagement in the classroom. So therefore, if we're able to build positive relationships with children, help them feel seen and heard, then they're more likely to be engaged in the learning, which then will result in better outcomes because they're more receptive to learn from you, from the educator, and have a greater sense of happiness, joy within their environment to then be able to thrive. So it becomes hand in hand. I don't think you can have one or the other. Right, okay, you can have those punitive schools, and be very, very strict and so forth, but you will ultimately get pushback. And I think we need to think about the times that we are actually living in, where children are so much more informed. They have access to so much more when we think about social media and so forth. So that whole idea of children seen and not heard, and they're just going to follow exactly what you say and how you say it. What are we actually creating for the next generation? It actually doesn't fit the next stage of where this world is heading to. And I think it's about how we also help our children to be critical thinkers. If we're constantly not allowing our children to ask questions and to question the world and to ask why, then how are we helping them to be thinkers of themselves and to be able to make informed decisions for their future? It all comes hand in hand. And I think we cannot confuse it with thinking we can only do one or the other. Both definitely helps to ensure that academic outcomes are strong.
That makes complete sense. And I feel like anyone who might have had that argument before might be rethinking it after hearing you explain it like that. And you had another big turning point in your career when you had your first Ofsted inspection as a head teacher. The inspector, well, actually, I'll let you explain in your own words what happened during that situation. And I guess my question is off the back of that is, how did that shape your, I guess, your confidence and your ambition in the way that it was before? And how did that impact you, not only as a leader, but as a human being?
Yeah, so this wasn't in my current school, this in a previous school, um, following my first headship. And I had Ofsted, I had the Ofsted inspector come. And when they arrived, I introduced myself as the head of school, and they literally looked me up and down in disgust and just thought, really, are you the head teacher? That led to a number of occurrences throughout that process that ultimately left me feeling deflated. I felt mistreated. There was definitely elements of racism, discrimination, and so forth. Not going into too much detail, but basically being clear on how that left me feeling was very despondent, left me feeling undervalued, left me feeling as if I wasn't good enough, and that all the hard work, which I actually deep within knew I had done to support the school and to move the school forward, it was totally undone, in the sense of I was kind of removed from that school. And yeah, it was a very, very low point in my career. So I had a choice at that point. And to add to that, there were ongoing elements of bullying and so forth that followed. But as I said, I had to make a choice, and I could either allow myself to continually be crushed or rebuild myself back up. And this didn't happen in a day. This happened over a period of time. So I don't want to give anyone the illusion that I just got it all back together. But firstly, I had to remind myself that I had nothing to feel ashamed of, because I think sometimes we can easily feel like, okay, if Ofsted come and judge my school as inadequate or not okay, then that's a reflection on me as a person. And no, that was a reflection of the systemic issues that we encounter. So firstly, I had to remind myself of that. Secondly, I had to align myself to my beliefs. So my faith is such a great part of who I am. So I had to really center myself in that. I also then had to think about my environments. So this environment, the particular trust that I was within, it wasn't necessarily the right environment for me, because I didn't necessarily get the support that I think that I should have been given, knowing what I knew they knew about my leadership and so forth. So I had to go out and seek environments, go and network, go to different events, and find environments that actually helped to build me up. I also had to remind myself of my capabilities, because in the moment, your mind does tricks on you and makes you think that you can't do many things. And then you have to say, no, actually, but I have done that. So it's almost like going back through and remind yourself of all the successes that you've had or that I've had prior to that one moment in time. And then I had to think about how I'm going to own my behavior. So when I talk about owning your behavior, it's about understanding what you have control of and understanding that I do have power that I do have agency. And so, although they may be choosing to treat me in this way, I can determine how I treat myself and the decisions that I'm going to be making. So, I had to be intentional about the things that I was deciding for myself. And then ultimately, it was about aligning myself back to my mission and my values and my vision for myself and for education and why I stepped into it in the first place. And it was because of that where I kind of ended up, well, I did actually, ended up going and applying for another headship, securing that headship. I've had other Ofsted inspections since, and they've gone well. I've been able to hold my ground, and understand the power that I have, even if individuals do not show the level of respect that I expect.
Mhm.
um, and yeah, I'm here now. I'm a thriving head teacher. I I've also got an organisation called Aspiring Heads, which stemmed off that, in terms of helping other Black teachers, aspiring leaders step into those leadership positions and recognising their worth and so forth. And I'm also now an author of this book, Your Leadership Matters, Empowering Educators of the Global Majority and Allies. So had I allowed that one moment in time to define me, I would have been doing myself an injustice. And actually, I would confidently say be doing the educational system an injustice, because I know that I've got much more to give and much more to support and inspire others to continue to stand and to be that individual that many children still need within the realms of the space that we work.
That is super inspiring. And thank you for being so open and sharing what was a difficult time, but it's turned into a success for you. And you mentioned Aspiring Heads, and you were actually on maternity leave when you started this up during the pandemic in the wake of George Floyd's murder. And we all know like the power, the conversations, the way that we were able to start confronting this institutional racism that lives globally among us all. And why did it feel so important for you to stand up and do something in education around leadership? And yeah, what was that moment that you're like, actually, I'm gonna do something about this?
Well, in terms of setting the scene, I literally, as I said, just came out of hospital, just had my baby, COVID shut down, and I just sat at that kitchen table, and I remember following the fence of George Floyd, thinking I've got to do something, and I noticed that alongside my husband, that there was only 1% of Black head teachers in the UK. And I had to think about what I could do to help rather than remaining part of the problem. Because I'm a great believer, if we're not actively doing something to challenge or to push the tide in the opposite direction, then you're ultimately not helping. And if you're not helping, then you're just being part of the issue. And so for me, I was very clear that I was not going to sit back and continue to see my brothers and sisters, in terms of Black individuals, those from the global majority, be physically and metaphorically strangled, suffocated, abused, battered, disregarded, undervalued, sidelined. I wasn't going to just sit back and just let that continue to happen. And so in terms of the power that I had, was the fact that I was part of that 1%. I had an element of influence. I had the visibility. And so I decided to write a leadership program and then to offer that out to people who were probably just like me, who knew what they wanted to do and knew what they wanted to aspire to become, but struggled to find the right environments to be able to navigate their ways through. And so Aspiring Heads was ultimately I created a community interest company. It won the Fair Education Alliance Award as well, and also the Community Choice Award. So it was very clear in that period of time that it was highly needed. And we've tried to and continue to strive to secure funding for individuals to go onto the program. It's a 6 months leadership program that they can come on, where I'm actually placing myself in a vulnerable position because I'm helping them to learn from my own experiences, and I'm picking that and thinking about, okay, what could have been done differently to ensure that they didn't necessarily encounter the same things that I've encountered. And so they've just got, I always use the terminology of just having a better toolkit than I ever had throughout that journey.
And you've mentioned the 1% statistics a couple times there, but I think we should really focus on that. Only 1% of head teachers in the UK are Black or global majority. And when you're thinking of that statistic and when you're thinking of the people you're speaking to and the people coming on your program, what do you still see as the systemic barriers? And what would it take to genuinely and meaningfully shift that statistic?
To put it bluntly, we know it's racism, right? And we can see that in many of the structures, even if we step out of education. So, I was even just talking with my sons the other day, and, even think about football. And you think about all the players on the pitch, quite diverse. But then when you look at the football managers, how many Black football managers are there? I personally, I'm not just. I can't say that I am a great football fan, but from my knowledge, I can't name one.
No, it's true.
And that for me speaks volumes. We also have, staying within that same context, you have football players from the global majority who are celebrated when they do well. And as soon as they make one mistake, they are abused publicly and basically hung out to dry. And when we transfer that into the education system, I think we can see the same in different ways. So, if I even, challenge trust leaders and just general leaders in schools, if we look at the structure and look at who is represented on each level, the cleaners, probably you find maybe diversity there, or maybe just generally Black or those from the ethnic minority groups. You go through teacher assistants, probably the same. Teachers may have much more variety there. Leadership, it then starts reducing. You just see much more whiteness as you go through. And then you look at governors, you look at trustees, then you look at members at the top of that. I would put a bet on it. And we know the statistics tell us that having a Black person there, or having more than one Black person there, is usually very, very rare. And so there are many reasons for that, or should I say, feeds into that. So if we think about recruitment and the many barriers that lie within that, I don't believe there's enough mentoring and coaching for individuals who look like me to support them as they move through. And if we think about culturally competent places of work, when you are the only Black person in that space, or when you do not feel valued or you do not feel reflected in the curriculum, you can always feel like you're pushing against something, a force that is 10 times greater. And therefore, it becomes really tiring, very exhaustive. And it drains a lot out of you. And so then being able to sustain that journey and continue to push on through that journey then becomes much more challenging. And then you see the exit paths coming out. So then there's something there around the retention piece for those from the global majority individuals. So there is a lot of work to be done to really challenge the systemic racial barriers that are faced by so many.
And you are doing that work. I mean, 1 in 3 people who do the program either secure a promotion or a headship after leaving the program. And that is just an amazing. I mean, we've talked about horrible, hard hitting statistics, but that statistic in itself is an amazing one that should be celebrated. What do you think it is about the program that means that people who go through it and come out the other side of it are so successful? And what are some of the things that leaders listening more generally could take on board to see how they could support people in their schools in a similar way?
I think the key thing with aspiring heads is that it's not based on a tick box. It's not like a criteria that you're just having to follow through, but it's based on the premise of care and seeing individuals for who they are and looking out for them, after them, giving them the resources. And when I say that, in terms of helping them with different frameworks and stuff that they can use and lean upon when they're having to have those most difficult conversations or when they're up against conflict within the workplace and so forth. And I think what that space does is provide them with reassurance. It helps them to see that they are not the only one, because there is a lot of gaslighting. You will express and say, this is how I'm feeling, or this happened to me, the microaggressions and so forth. And then sometimes you're often faced with, oh, maybe they didn't mean it, they didn't understand it, or no, there's so many excuses as to why that cannot possibly be true. But what that space does, it helps to validate their experiences. And by doing that and also helping them to see the strengths that they do have, because many a times it's not often celebrated, or it is used to the school's advantage, where they'll be given more and more things to do, but without the label or without the payment, it's helping them to understand the value that they bring and also understanding the agency that they have. Because very often you can feel like there's no way out. But what we help them to do and see is that there is alternative pathways that we can navigate together, and also the power of linking arms. Because when you're trying to do something alone and in isolation, it can be very, very lonely. But what we've been able to build is community and our own little ecosystem of support. So if someone is struggling in a particular area, there's bound to be someone else who struggled with the same thing. And so it's being able to share those experiences and to share um, potential best ways forward to overcome those challenges.
And you mentioned earlier that Aspiring Heads was set up just after you've given birth. And a big part of your life, as well as doing all of these other amazing things, is being a mother. And I think it's rare that we see people stay in the profession, especially at head level, once they've had kids, just because of the demands on their time. How do you personally balance that? And what do you think needs to be done within the system so that more mothers stay on in those leadership positions once they have children?
Yeah, so I will say, and a moment to plug my husband and just say he's absolutely amazing. And I think having that supportive relationship does help. However, I also want to say that I know other head teachers and a Black thriving head teacher who is a single mum with the same number of children, who is thriving and doing incredible stuff within the education space. So whatever your particular circumstances, I always believe there is a way. But in terms of how you do that, you have to make sure that it works for you. I don't think I can sit here and say, yeah, you should still pursue headship and so forth when you have children, because maybe it's just not the right thing for that individual person. And I think that's okay. And that should be celebrated. The fact that, I'm deciding to step back and do things in a way that works for me. With all that said, I have been able to do what I've been able to do through ensuring that I am a reflective leader. So I'm constantly thinking, okay, what's right for me in this particular season of life? And so, I had children when I was a teacher, and because of me stepping into the realm of motherhood, I had to do that differently. So whereas I would often come in early and maybe leave later, I was maybe coming in a bit more earlier and then leaving earlier, and vice versa. Sometimes it was coming in later and staying later. It was all about, okay, what is the best balance for me at that time? And I was also very fortunate because my mother has also been a great support network as well, um, within my journey going through. I will also say, in terms of for mothers, and also I suppose leaders within the sector supporting mothers, they need to stop being penalised for having children. And that in itself really upsets me, because we are pushing out great teachers and great female leaders because of the penalties that come with motherhood. And actually, we need to look at a much more flexible way of doing things. I think there's a very fixed mindset about how schools should operate. But actually, I think we need to challenge ourselves and think, okay, no, but how can we do things differently? How can we be a bit more creative? I know another head teacher, but also for myself, whereas because there were personal commitments, we decided to do senior leadership meetings 7 a.m. in the morning, as opposed to staying after school and doing it later in the evening. I know leaders who've done governance meetings, they typically be 6 p.m. in the evening or so forth, where they actually done it early morning or done it throughout the school day. And we always talk and advocate for individuals not to have a fixed mindset. But I think within the education system, I think there is so much fixation over having fixed systems, when actually it needs to be a bit more and much more humane. We have to understand that we all go through different journeys, and not solely, I know we're talking about motherhood, but understanding that there's different points in people's lives. So it could be caring responsibilities. When we take care of the whole person, our teachers and so forth, our teacher assistants and everyone who helps schools to be the best place for children, they will give 110% back. And so it's thinking, if this doesn't necessarily work for all, how can we vary the approaches? Because I think sometimes, just like with children, we think, okay, to make it fair, we have to give them all the same. No, it's about ensuring that we are meeting the needs of those children, and that can look different for every single child. And I think we need to apply the same kind of thinking for our teachers, our leaders, our female leaders, and thinking, okay, this is a need. How can we do things differently to meet this need? Even when we think about perimenopause or menopause and so forth, like thinking about the needs and how can we do it so that individuals can still do the work that they're so passionate about, whilst also um, supporting their loved ones and being there in the best way that gives them peace and joy within.
Yeah, no, that I think that's right. And we hear a lot in the sector about head teacher workload, well-being, work-life balance. And for you, what are the reasons you find the role so rewarding and the reasons you've stayed when it's got hard? And something that maybe you could say to someone who's considering leadership and becoming a head teacher about the reasons why they should go for it, even though everything tells them maybe that it's not the right thing to do.
I think it's mainly about finding the right place of work. I think sometimes we can think that when things are difficult or you're not getting the support that you need, that your only solution is to settle with that. I remember one of my coaches years back said to me, "The world is big, you know," when I was just so focused on that one problem. And so, for example, when I secured the headship that I'm in now, I actually found out I was pregnant a couple of months after. And so I went into a bit of a panic. Like, I've just secured this headship. I'm meant to be starting in September, and I have just found out I'm pregnant. The nerves to make that phone call to my CEO to say, thank you again that you've offered me this position, but this is my current situation. And do you know what was so refreshing? He was just like, okay, congratulations, wonderful news. Okay, we'll just find a solution. We'll find a way through. And we did. I started, um, was there for a few months. There was an executive lead. So we worked alongside. So we made sure that there was a smooth transition when I left in the February. I went off, had my child in the March. And there was continuation of support and leadership to ensure that the school could continue in the best way whilst I was on maternity leave. And then I came back, a really smooth transition back in. I just felt really supported. And I've gone on, as you said, to lead a very thriving school from a school that was in the most desperate situation. And in all of that, there's been COVID. And in all of that, I've had a baby. It is possible. It's absolutely possible, but it's about having the right support around you. And so I applaud all of those environments. And I've been fortunate, as I said, with this one. And I've also worked with leaders beforehand who were also who understood that it can be possible. And so for me, I'm always, again, taking time to reflect on the different stages that I'm at. I don't think the same approach necessarily works for every single stage. So, okay, I'm now in headship, or I'm now a teacher, or I'm now stepping into my assistant headship. Okay, thinking about the distance from my house, thinking about the stages that my children are at. Okay, well, they're primary. I've got a 5-year-old, and I've also got a 14 and a 15-year-old. So I'm in that teenage mother parenting stage, but also still have a 5-year-old who is highly dependent. So it's coming back to the drawing board, and I do this with my family and including with my boys. And I say, is there anything that mum could do differently? And I get feedback from them. And then we look at do a reflection piece where we look at things that we want to stop doing, do more of. And we come together and we have those discussions. And then so it's really important that I take time to listen and to hear from my children. And I'm really proud so far. My boys so far have just been like, I'm very proud of you, Mum. I feel like you're, I don't think there's anything you can do differently to make things even better. But I don't take that for granted. And I will continue to touch base with my kids, touch base with myself, but then also thinking about my leaders as well and the individuals that I work alongside with. And it's really important that I'm not just only thinking about my own needs, but thinking about, okay, how can I support them to meet their needs as well? And then we kind of, tie it all together and create the way of working that supports us all to thrive.
Yeah, I like that. I feel like I wonder how many people after this just be like, oh, I have a reflection meeting at home now, and then don't get the feedback they want to be like, that's the last time I'm going to be doing that. And we like to finish the podcast with a quick fire 4 round of questions. So the first one is, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing the education sector right now?
We have a crisis at the moment with a number of children with social, emotional, mental health needs or special educational needs that are not being met with the current system. And yeah, there is a lot of work to be done to ensure that our most vulnerable children are not being left behind.
Second question, what motivates you on difficult days?
Mm, I'm very purpose driven. So I don't just look at the here and now. I'm a person who looks long term. I am naturally a visionary. So I'm always thinking about the long gains as opposed to the here and now and the reason why I'm here.
Third question, what has been your proudest career achievement so far?
That would be to have secured my headship at the time that I did, because that was unheard of. As I said, it wasn't common, but I was able to show that that is possible.
And final question, what are you most looking forward to the rest of this academic year?
Seeing the children in my school thrive, um, we have children with lots of different challenges. We have children that have lots of different needs, lots of different passions. And there are many success stories as well in terms of what they're doing and so forth. And I think what I love about being in school and following the year through is seeing where the child started and then where they end up by the time my staff and have really committed to them and have really been intentional with how they've supported them and helped them not just to thrive academically but socially, and just seeing their eyes light up at the end of the well, continuously throughout the year at different points, but ultimately at the end of the year, yeah, when we're like, yeah, we've done a good job here for our children.
Oh, amazing. I bet that's the best feeling. Thank you so much for coming on today. I feel like listeners would have learned loads about your journey, but also the impact that has on the sector and some of the things that they can take away to make a difference in their settings. Thank you for all of the work that you're doing and continue to do. You're a great example of what success can look like when we all come together.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.